Paintball nerd.
Today's guest on Paintball Nerds Media Mogul interview is a writer, producer, editor, and director. He's responsible for films such as Rivalry, Coming Home, One Night in November, The Roster, Surf City Dreams, 15, The Best Kids in Texas, Holy Grail, the Jawbreaker video series. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Dan Napoli.
What's up, Zyzek?
Hey, man. Happy to have you. Legend over here.
Thanks, man. Happy to be here.
Yes, sir. So, Dan, how'd you get into paintball?
I got into paintball in a very similar way. I went out with a group, the cool, that's the short version of it.
Yeah.
The little bit longer version of it, which weirdly ties to what I do, is you see a little gray in the beard here. So 1994, 1995 is my freshman year of college. And if you're a sports fan or a sports historian, what you will remember about 1994 is there was a Major League Baseball strike. And ESPN had a ton of slots open up because they had baseball contracts. They started televising everything in their dog that they could get a contract for. And one of those things was paintball. And just like, again, sounds ancient, but no cell phones, no social media. So when you live in a fraternity house in the mid 90s, what you do after class is everybody sits around in the lounge and watches ESPN. So the ESPN World Championships were on, where everybody's like, what? This looks amazing. What is this? One of the dudes went over to the phone book, did the search, and was like, can I curse on here, or do we have to tighten it up?
No, go ahead. Go let it fly.
He was like, holy shit, there's one of these. Well, I always like to ask, because the sailor mouth can go pretty hard.
Yeah.
They're like, holy shit, dude, there's one of these courses here in town. We should go. So booked a fraternity. Unbeknownst to me, I wouldn't know it till 4 years later, but like it was the field ran by the legendary Ed Poorman. This is as Avalanche is making its rise. Like Crystal Sawyer was working there. Rocky Cagnoni was working there. But yeah, so much like a lot of dudes saw it on TV, went out and played as part as a group. And then like our fraternity loved it. I mean, it escalated. Like first it was it was once every year. Then everybody had so much fun. It was like once every semester. We did it once in the fall, once in the spring. So yeah, man, that's how I got here.
So what inspired you to create paintball films?
So I think at the time, so I graduated college in 99 and I jumped on at Warp Sports. I'm from the whole world of punk rock and skate and surf and snow and all that kind of stuff like that. And as I got more into it, so this is Avalanche at like the height, like for younger viewers, if you don't know, like before Dynasty, like there was Avalanche, and they will tell you that, like Avalanche, where they weren't kids, but Avalanche was really the very, very first rock stars, larger than life dudes, and in paintball. And so just coming from that world where Burton's putting out you put out a film, they put out a film every year. Birdhouse at the time, had just dropped The End, and then growing up with like, Pal Peralta videos and Vans 411. And that didn't really have paintball didn't really have that yet. You had Trauma Head, you had War Pig, you had Patrick Spohr and Benini in production and push in probably like 2000 in my second year. So it didn't kind of exist. And then I started meeting, like-minded people, met Brad Mon of Dynasty, and who's like one of my best friends and mentors. And Brad was from a lot of that same, I mean, he grew up in San Diego skating with Damon Way. And so it was one of those, I guess the short answer is I didn't see what I wanted personally in the, out there in the world yet for paintball. So we jumped out and made it. And my degrees in journalism and sports marketing, huge sports person, played baseball into college, grew up on NFL films, and all that kind of stuff like that. So we didn't see what we thought would be out there, what we kind of wanted to see in the world. So we went out and kind of started creating it, like right as there was this boom of content. And then probably, this is like 2001-ish. As we get into the mid 2000s, there's a ton of cool content, ton of cool. It's VHS, DVDs, etc. But there's not really much story. It's all like our offhanded would be like car crash would be our references to the action reel, as we would call it. You've got, and then you had Pat doing his very beautiful surf docs, but those are really, really art piece. I mean, that's what his serial killers and Push and Sunday Drivers, like they have a lot more in common with that abstract. And you also have to remember, again, context is king in everything, right? No webcasts, folks. Like there is no, right. So you don't like, well, what happened? Well, how this, you're talking about coverage. So we kind of really started getting into being sort of like a surrogate via like a post-production show, but the narrative, at least, of a tournament, and kind of embedding with teams and kind of telling how they had got through the rounds and whatnot. So that's kind of how we started landing there.
So what was the first paintball film that you were involved in?
I guess that depends on the first paintball film I was involved in was Push. So I served involved is the key word, underlined and made small.
Sure.
I served as the music supervisor for Pat and Brian, which basically means I learned how to go out and acquire like the music rights to all the songs that Pat wanted to use. And I think he was cool enough to, I think I got like 2 suggestions in there. I think I got 2. I think I know less than Jake, and I think AFI were maybe like, Pat, you should check these guys out. But that was the very first thing I did. Like I said, I came from, I was probably dead set coming out of college. I was going to like move to LA and go work for like Epitaph or like a punk rock or some other punk rock record label. Was working at a record store at the time. So I had my feet in there a little bit. So that's the very first that I was ever involved in. The first thing that I ever did that you could loosely call a film is first year I was working with Planet Eclipse. We did the Egomaniacs, and there was which was like a promo DVD that started coming with their stuff. It followed was shot over 2006 season, and there was like a 15-minute short. I think we called it like Death or Glory. That was basically about excessive falling apart. They were coming in to the 06 season, which got covered much more serial killers and whatnot, but they had lost like all of their studs. They had lost their money source. So if Dynasty didn't win Orange County, they would have won the tournament, or they would have won the series, pardon me. And this was the very famous controversial Dynasty versus Joy Division finals from Orange County, California. And so we did a little tiny one with that. The first thing that really looked like it could be a standalone film was we did something in 2008 for Eclipse called Collision Course, which was covered Avalanche and Avalanche and X Factor, both Eclipse teams that played in the Huntington Beach finals when HB was still like a pretty big deal. And through some other promo stuff that we were doing with the clips, this is where structurally you start talking about, like, so we lit them in the back of the Eclipse booth. We had sit down interviews. So that's at least like a little tournament thing. The first real film was Rivalry, which was about Excessive and Vicious in the PSP semi-pro kind of throughout. And that's where we really took like, a full 60-minute narrative or thereabouts and kind of following them throughout the season. They were both Eclipse teams, and they were both competing for like the pro spot, in semi-pro to win and to kind of move on. So that was the very first where we're actually kind of getting like a structure to it, and it kind of going over like a longer period of time.
See, I mean, you've been involved in paintball films. I mean, Push is probably the first, real paintball film that I'd say you were involved in that, and I mean, you've had your hand in it looks like nearly every paintball film since then. In some way, you may not have been completely responsible for it, but you've been involved in it.
A lot, yeah. I mean, a lot of them. You have because you had this boom. And you've had a boom come in some different ways, I suppose. You had, Dirter and Rob Sloat, a great friend of mine. We do a bunch of work outside paintball together. In the mid 2000s, you had a bunch of companies pop up. Then you had brands starting to do things, which makes sense. Again, borrowing from other action sports where like they're kind of doing their own gigs, and whether it's internal people. So there's a handful of things that, Cena's Impact series wasn't mine. Obviously, none of the serial killer stuff. The last 3 or 4 Dirter stuff, I was the music supervisor on, because Rob was just like, dude, if I pay you something, will you just, this is such a pain in the ass. Will you just do this for me? I was like, yeah, of course, dude. So yeah, I've had my hand in, a lot of different eras at the very least.
Best Kids in Texas. As soon as I saw that available on Apple TV, I bought it right away, and it took me kind of on this journey where I was emotionally invested into X Factor in a way that I've never been before, and I felt like I got to know those guys and in a way that I never got to before. Hearing Alex Martinez's story and how he got into the sport with his son, and then his son quit playing and he was going to get out and decided to stay in, and then it blossomed into this beautiful story of X Factor. It just made me feel emotionally vested into the characters and the team. So how do you create that? How do you create that feeling for the viewer?
Well, first, man, thank you for, sharing that, because that's awesome. I mean, that's what you hope for something like that. Like, that's why we're doing things like that. And I think, you asked earlier, what was the first film? The film prior to Best Kids in Texas was 15. And that, for me as a director, in some levels, that's the first real film, about a third of it. And I kind of joke, and this is a little long, but don't worry, we're getting into Best Kids in Texas, I promise. I kind of joke that, like, oh man, for about 25 minutes, 15 was a real movie. And then we got into Who Shot Who from Dorito 14, which of course is an exaggeration, obviously. But like, that's kind of my jokingly shorthand. And as I grow as like a filmmaker and a director, and when we talk about outside audiences and the way that we watch other stuff, and I always kind of like for me, and some of it is from being around for so long too, is and just being a storyteller and a consumer of stuff, is it's like, okay, when it gets to when it gets to Who Shot Who from Dorito 14 in the game to move on to the semis, like, your audience goes like from here to like here. So I could not have made Best Kids without being able to spend a third of that Dynasty film in, and getting something real, which was the tension of Oliver's left. He's been kind of, in that time, he's been this kind of enigma. He's kept coming back at the last minute, and how do they feel about that? And now they're going through this season, and they're on the way to maybe be the first time that they don't win. So that opens the door to Best Kids in Texas. And X Factor, and I love all of those dudes. I mean, so many of them, I mean, I almost consider like family. Alex Dixon, like his wife, Miranda, I've stayed at their houses a bunch. Like, X Factor went pro in the Eclipse system the same year that I started doing films and video content for Eclipse. So I've spent a lot of time with those guys. So we had a real intimacy with them. We did a very Hard Knocks inspired show. We'll use that word, called The Roster. We did 2 seasons of that with them. And through that process with Ryan Brand and a bunch of their other guys, like that kind of stuff only works if people are super vulnerable with you. They're just no hold backs. They just, and so in messing a little bit again with that roster project, X Factor, because that's who they are, right? I mean, if anybody that knows Colt Roberts or any of they don't give a shit about, like, they're like, here's who I am. Here's what we're doing. You can like it, you cannot. It doesn't matter. They're not dicks. They're the nicest people in the world, but there's no putting on airs with those dudes. Which, as a filmmaker, you're just like, oh my god, that's amazing. So when you look at X Factor's journey, just them as people, and how paintball came into that and stuff like that, it was so rich. Kind of like what you were just saying, and how you connected with them in a way that you never had before. And it didn't matter that they had this streak where they didn't win, because you were connecting to the characters that were in that movie. So that's just kind of how we went about it. It's like, my job is to, I always think about that as being a director. It's my job is to take this in a sports doc setting, this giant swath of information, crunch it down into something that is consumable and makes sense, but then also be able to do so in like an emotional way, and then also not overshadow what your subjects, like real actual stories are. So we tried to do that with Best Kids in Texas. The thing I'm most proud of with that film is, will always be, I hope there's things that are more successful than that, that are not mine, but we will always have that distinction. Like, that's the first documentary to ever have like legitimate streaming distribution. So, a distributor, sales agent got it, acquired it. It's streaming on Amazon Prime, which I think they discontinued now because it was full of political stuff. But like, they had like a sub store where anybody could upload their stuff. Like, not that. It's in iTunes. It is the first paintball documentary that you could actually go into the authorized store, or like you can go into Amazon Prime, and if you have Prime, it's streaming. So that's pretty cool. I'm pretty proud of that fact. And like I said, I hope it's a gateway, for tons of other filmmakers to get their stuff in there.
I certainly hope so as well, at least from a paintball perspective, because seeing paintball on the movie store on my Apple TV was like, I couldn't click buy fast enough, and it just blew my mind that it was there. And then when I started watching it and getting emotionally invested in the characters, like, this is incredible. This is changing paintball. This is really changing the landscape of paintball media and exposing it to an audience that may not see it. And the story is engaging whether you like paintball or not. And I think that's what's so important. We needed to, paintball players live incredible lives. They really do. And if that story can go out to the masses, I think it'll draw more attention to the sport. and help the sport grow ultimately. It's funny you mentioned 15. I was just watching it, and it's kind of unrolling into this scenario where Oliver is about to leave the team, and then he sends this long email to Rusty, and Rusty's describing this email like, okay, it's long, it's a bunch of paragraphs and something about the universe, and and then like all of a sudden he's not showing up to Texas, he's not showing up for the rest of the year. And the way that you edited that to get someone emotionally invested, like, wow, Oliver is not coming back, and look at the effect that it's having on his teammates. I think that's a skill set that people don't understand. Like, it's almost like what you're doing on the computer with editing is almost like playing a musician or playing a musical instrument,
Yeah, man. I mean, look, story is, which Maddie Marshall will tell you all about, right? Story is super important, and it's a skill set, and understanding where, I mean, they're called beats when you write and when you do screenplays and and you do a scene, there are beats in a scene, and in those kinds of like it 1,000,000% is a craft. Like, I think a lot of people misunderstand in a couple different ways. I think one, just generally speaking, people don't understand that documentaries have writers. Or if they do, it immediately is like, oh, it's like The Hills, which is, I guess, too, it was the Kardashians, like whatever. You're kind of like reality-esque, where your showrunners are like, or your producers. And if you talk to anybody that's worked on those shows, they are like infusing the drama. Maybe it's in a sit down that they're being like, man, we just had Suri in here and she said you are a fucking bitch. Could you believe that? And then they get that, like, that's not really, but look at your Academy Award winning documentaries. Like, they have writers. Like, there is a structure, there is some things that go into that, and kind of figuring that out. And it's something I spend a lot. It's a skill I spend a lot of time trying to continue to improve on, in a very similar way, right? That it's like, whatever, somebody that's a paintball player that's practicing, continuing to get snap shooting, or their understanding of the game down. I mean, it's like that with story. And so, like, there's even things in Best Kids in Texas, and that's what like Iron Kids is going to be a whole nother level of where we're going, as far as from like a story standpoint.
So tell us about that. That's a new and exciting thing that you're working on. It's We Could Be a Dynasty, right?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, started in November 2021. We're working on an Iron Kids documentary. The Iron Kids are what birth Dynasty. And so it's kind of interesting too. Some people would be like some old schoolers who, we talked about in their interviews. We're like, what the fuck are you doing? This team was around for a year. They played an amateur circuit and beat nobody. Why are we talking about them? And so that's awesome. I love to like embrace that as part of the discussion. But there's a lot of deeper things there. I mean, it's even fascinating. It's like, and Alex and I have talked about this and Oliver at length. It's weirdly, like, I get it, but you also ask yourself, like, it's kind of like Ramones, like, you see a 20-year-old walking around with a Ramones t-shirt, and you're like, dude, you're not even like, why? And not in a gatekeeper way, but in a real, you're just like, that's awesome. But you're like, why does this even resonate with you? Like, you're not weirdly, you see young players wearing Iron Kids headbands, and it's like, wow, even before Hermeses kind of like, got back into the scene, you would see that occasionally. It's like, well, why does that resonate? And it was this whole sort of like secret thing between, and it's even talked about in Best Kids in Texas. There's several references that the BKIT thing was, hey, we see this Iron Kids thing out here in the world. Like, we want to make let's make our own version of that. Or like, Ryan Brand, I think he even makes a comment in the film that like Dynasty were gods to us, but like we didn't even think that was possible. So, the Iron Kids are what, really, really birthed Dynasty. But there's so much deeper story there in a number of ways, because you're talking about some societal things which are really interesting, because it's kind of the last, so you're talking about the mid 90s to the late 90s. You're talking about kind of the last generation of people growing up like untethered. Cell phones were not that prominent. You actually paid by the minute to have them. Like, so it's kind of that last gen of a bit of like, hey, come home when the street lights are on.
Yeah.
Come on. Like, you have kids that are 15-year-old kids going to the World Cup where 18-year-old Eric Crandall is like their ward. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm sure that'll be fine. Which it was. I mean, Crandall's a great dude. But you just think about some of those premises in 2023. If you would roll up as like, yeah, this is my 18-year-old friend, Mom. He's going to take us to Florida. You won't be able to get in touch with me. I'll be home in like 9 days. Like, will you buy me a plane ticket? And then you also have a lot of, and I think this is maybe what's going to get a lot of people excited. Because a large part of that film is going to also be Paintball's story in transitioning through the 90s. Because you have to understand where Dynasty fits in that. And you can't talk about the Iron Kids without talking about the Iron Men. And if you're younger, you might not get this, but I mean, the Iron Men were both nationally, but obviously a California institution.
Right.
In the 90s, and that's a big plot point, a tension point between all of those guys. So there's just so rich with story. We're kind of bookmarking it. I mean, the story is going to take place from like the mid 90s through like 2002. That's kind of like our bookends. So yeah, we started November 2021. I think we've got like 39 interviews in the can. I'm currently in post-production. We're probably going to have another handful of what we call pickup interviews, like some little like people that we're going to go get afterwards that we know need to like fill in little spots. But it's incredible. I mean, we've gotten all the Iron Kids. We've got a Dave Youngblood interview. We've got an Eric Felix interview. Some old schoolers, Chuck Hench, like all of these people that are really, intricate to their journey. So, and this is, you talk about a film that's not about shooting Dorito 14. This is really one that's not going to be about that. Yeah.
That's exciting, man. I mean, I'm super excited to see it. It's like it's really this local movement is what the Iron Kids were. And they were trying to emulate the most dominant force in paintball at the time, but they knew really that they were kind of inferior to that when they started. They were the Iron Kids, right? And it's gonna be a beautiful thing to see unfold, because what the Iron Kids ultimately became was the most dominant force in paintball, and they overshadowed really what the Iron Men did. To this point in time, it's they are the most dominant force in paintball.
I think people, I mean, if you're currently in paintball, folks might not even understand this because it's so commonplace. Like, the Iron Kids were not an anointed; they just fucking took the name.
Yeah.
Like, that's not cool. Like now
and
you're
it's
in a whole
trademarked. The shield is
generation
trademarked.
where you were like, you know, it's standard that you're going to have whatever, you know, somebody takes their feeder team and throws kids in front. Like, you know, we've had that for decades, and that's, you know, but I mean, they were not endorsed by the Iron Men. They didn't ask Dave or Shaner or any of those guys if they could use it. They just decided. So even some of that is like, who's the sack on these 14-year-old kids to just take and it was funny in some of the interviews. So like, in Steve Rabikoff talking to him going through the process, like, you know, it's funny because now with hindsight, I mean, I had to, like, again, I wasn't having a Kardashian producer moment, but I was asking because I remember those times, and you know, now the narrative is like, oh, it's like, we love those guys and we thought it was awesome. And I was like, cool. I was like, Scuba, are you like, did everybody feel, and did everybody feel that way? Because I thought some guys were like, fuck these kids. And he's like, oh yeah, oh right. You know, and he's kind of remembering that, yeah, at the time there were some like established folks that were like, who are these guys? Yeah. But yeah, they've certainly lived up to it.
You know, it's interesting to think about how what you're doing with this documentary is going to impact paintball as a whole. You know, because it is the greatest story I think that we have to date. So, Dan, what would you like to see in paintball media or paintball films that we don't currently see?
Oh, let's see. What would I like to see that we don't currently see? I would like, I mean, it's really hard, but I would like to see more people tackling narrative. It's probably just my bias. But like, you know, Caleb the cat who did the Heroines doc, I would like to see some of, and you know, this to me, young generation, you know, of your Moffats and Dylans and stuff like that, eventually, like, and have them be really different voices and not all that's a copy. Because I think if you got a bunch of different folks doing stuff, you would potentially, because like, I mean, there's no point for somebody to try to make films, like, from my perspective, my point of view, and even what it sounds like, because like, well, I've already done that, and a bunch of people have already done that. Like, I'd like to see more young people, young creatives, directors tackling narrative, even if it's short, but from whatever their point of view is. I think that would be, I think that would be cool. You know, again, that's my bias, because that's obviously like my world, both in and out of paintball. But yeah, in thinking, you know, and a little less, it's like the tournament coverage is super, I mean, it's really well covered between
saturated.
Yeah. I mean, between, you know, Go Sports, who, you know, had me out, which was, loved that, super thankful for Darren and those dudes. I got to be out at Sunshine Open working on some stuff like them, for them, pardon me. Between their coverage of event and then all of your indie media guys, like, there's a lot of, you know, coverage of the tournament. It would be interesting, because I think everything comes down to the people, you know. It comes down to making connections with, if you look at sports or entertainment in the various, it's like, you know, the ability to connect with, like, I like that guy or I like that girl, I'm rooting for them, I'm rooting against them. Some stuff to kind of, you know, get into those kinds of of areas. So yeah, I guess that's kind of what I would like to see.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind seeing a paintball film that has no playing paintball in it. And hear me out here.
No, man, I'm with.
I,
Lay it on
I
me.
was sharing with you earlier that paintball players live incredible lives. If you followed Greenspan for a year, if you followed Harrison Fry for a year on his Fry adventures, if you followed Ronnie Dizon, there's so many players I could name. If you followed their travels through a year or maybe even 2 years, and just showed the lifestyle that you can live by shooting paint-filled gel caps at other people, and there was no paintball in the documentary, it just shows that this is the lifestyle that's possible. I think that would really be a big hit and expose paintball to a broader demographic.
No, man, I follow you. I think this conversation is going to be very interesting if we picked it back up in a year to a year and a half, after Iron Kids is out, and then also the project that Miko's directing for Hermeses, which full disclosure, I am on as a supporter. I'm on as a producer, but this is definitely Miko's and Alex's vision driving that ship. Are getting into some uniqueness. And I think after that drops, I hope again that creatively unlocks a lot of other people's brains to be like, oh, so like I'm with you, dude, in the there's also something to be said for like a law of scarcity, right? Of if you lead up in a film setting and a 90-minute setting of if you make those action reels really count, and in storytelling you're building anticipation, and it's less is more, right? You really have an impact, as opposed to a flipped model where you're like, here's as much action as we can jam in here, right? Here's like
Right.
44 minutes of action and like 6 minutes of talking or off field or whatever. But I think, because Miko's got like, and I don't want to, it's his vision, so I don't want to speak out of step and share too much, but what he's foreseeing is really, really interesting. And even some of the stuff we've been experimenting with in the way that the action is shot, he and Alex's vision is really different. And we've even got Alex Frazier out there shooting some, which has been pretty awesome. I remember he called me coming back from one of his I was like, how is it? He was out there running around with a gimbal. He was like, I like this. This is cool. It's like, you get shot in the fucking thighs a lot. I'm like, yeah, you do, my man. And you can't shoot people back.
Exactly. And you're not expecting, you don't have the adrenaline rush of playing paintball and you just get shot on sidelines.
Oh, dude,
feels completely different.
Totally. I saw something, I think it got posted last night, of Ryan Moffat, and I was just like, oh, bro, I've been there so many times, because you're not expecting it, and it's just like, you're like, fuck.
And he got ripped too. You heard like 3 like, he's like, oh, that hurt.
Yeah, you definitely see that happen.
You mentioned filming different ways, and I saw at the Sunshine State Major a robot, like a very complicated looking robot with a carbon fiber arm on it. Is that for the Iron Kids documentary, or is that for the film that Miko's working on?
So that is not for the Iron Kids documentary, because the Iron Kids doc is all historical. That was shared between Iron Kids, the Hermeses film, and Go Sports and the league. So they had that thing. That thing was on the field on Sunday, and was providing some coverage. I was producing it on Saturday, doing environmentals around the complex, which look phenomenal. I know once Darren and his team get a hold of that stuff, they're going to make a bunch of really cool stuff. And then Miko and I were using it in some unique ways on some closed field stuff for the Hermeses project. But just really elevating those production values. I mean, you see that in and it was interesting because it was like the apparatus is what is like robotic and controlled. I mean, it's still using like a high-end camera, the film camera that we would use, which is, you know, manually controlled, and people, because I was talking to some people about this on social, because it is weird. I mean, it's a robot camera, but like the camera, it is, you know, the selects are made by a person. The only thing that's really robotic is driving the cart and moving those things. But like, yeah, I mean, dude, the Iron Kids doc is on the other way, that like, so Sammy Anzaria, who's our DP and has been around for almost as long as I have, I'm probably only a year out. Like, we're doing some things to be weirdly like 90s accurate, like almost vintage. Like, we're using a particular
time and
light
date
kit.
stamps on the corner of the thing.
Dude, we've talked about some VHS stuff, but like we lit everybody with I mean, if this isn't too inside baseball, this like classic like RE 3-point light kit that, I mean, was and it's still used a bunch. These Trestles, they have like a look to them, but like they were like a really nice in like 99. Like, it's like, ooh, they have those. Like now they're just sort of standard, but like we didn't use LEDs. We used these particular lights. We've talked about, if we shoot our slow-mo, shooting it at 48 frames a second, because back in the day in the 90s, like that was slow-mo. Twice your, just doing like little tricks like that to be more vintage. So no, that innovative stuff is all the League and Miko's project.
Gotcha. Are you allowed to talk about that a little bit more? Can you tell us anything more about that?
About Miko's project?
Yeah.
I think so. Or the Hermeses project. Let me make a little light adjustment here. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I am working on that. You know, I mean, the best way to describe it is they're making like, it's gonna kind of be an art film. And I think like it's been really cool seeing what Hermeses has done, because I feel weirdly like they've injected this move of creativity and uniqueness again, just kind of into paintball. So yeah, Hermeses, as it's Hermeses Productions. The soundtrack is, I'm on it as a music supervisor, and a producer and a post-production supervisor, which that's super boring. And that just means that I'm helping Miko structure how you manage all of this media, because there's all of this stuff like that. But it's going to be different. And this is not a sports doc. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. So like when I said earlier about getting younger voices and different stuff in there, it's like, I think this is a great example. Like this Hermeses project that Miko's directing is like, it's not a sports doc, and I'm not the guy to direct that. Like, that's not what I'm like. My strengths are story, are like narrative, and like that's not what's in that. So that's a great example of bringing somebody else. And Miko's wicked good, dude. He's done a bunch of outside stuff. He's been around forever. He's just a really talented guy. And I know also like Patrick Spore's coming back to that project just to shoot, but I shouldn't say just, because my God, but like Pat's shooting a bunch of stuff on that, which will be incredible. So they're kind of pulling a lot of people into their strengths. But like there's no sit down interviews in this, but it is featuring people and players. And so, you know, I think it's going to be a really exciting piece. I think, you know, it's got a lot more in common with snowboard films, ski films. I think, you know, and that's some stuff that we've all talked about on that project, is that we're missing a little bit of like, you know, there's an experience, like when you get to see, you go to a skis film or a surf film or a skate film, and you go to see it in a movie theater when they do the screenings and stuff, and just the joy that you leave with when you see that, and how much you want to go, like, I'm going riding tomorrow, man. Like, you're so stoked to go do, you know, I think that is what everybody hopes comes out of that project that both certainly. I hope people feel the same way about the Iron Kids too, that they're like, hey man, we can do this. But really out of that Hermeses project is that kind of like inspire people. I know the quote from Alex, I don't think you mind me sharing, was it's like he and his dad, who's a major part in all of his trajectory. They're big ski guys. They would go to a Warren Miller screening and afterwards be like, dude, I want to go. Can we go ride this weekend, Dad? Can we go ski? So, I think that's really what we hope, bringing back some of those things that are feelings. And it's really hard. Like, I don't know what the ROI is on feelings. I'm not an ROI guy. I know things have to make sense. I know, everything has to budget. Money doesn't grow on trees, but like, I don't know how you put a value on that, but I know those things are really important.
Well, it's the ROI could happen over a long period of time, and it could not. The ROI might not be monetary, right? It could be just growth of the sport, like how the skate videos inspire you to go out and skate. The ski videos inspire you to go out there and ski. This project with Hermeses Productions inspire you to go out there and play paintball. The Iron Kids documentary, the BKIT documentary, these are the things that make you want to become something, right? So you have two aspects of the game. One makes you want to strive for the highest level and shows you an example of that. And the other is like the action that's like in the art that's like, I want to go out there and do this. This is getting me juiced up to go play. So you got both there, and that's really exciting. Man, I'm excited about everything that you're working on. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, I'm fortunate to be working on two really cool things in two different. It's funny because the Iron Kids started like over Instagram. I think if I'm remembering this correctly, I think I saw that they were doing an Iron Kids band, and I was like, hey, documentary time, LOL. And like Oliver's like, dude, let's talk, man. And then
Wow.
So, had calls with him and Alex. And of course, like, we're also trying to coordinate, Alex is in California. I'm in Omaha. Oliver's in Bali. So I'm like,
Yeah.
11:30 p.m. my time. Okay. Yeah. I'll stay up for that. That's fine. Whew.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really fortunate.
Dan, what are you most thankful for that the paintball community has brought into your life?
Man, I mentioned earlier I was at the Sunshine Open, and it was overwhelming. Even pro players that are friends that I hadn't seen. I got to have some conversations with LJ, John Woodley, a bunch of the amount of welcomeness and love and respect I felt from the community was wild. Not that I haven't had it before, but just, in being gone, this is the first time I've really been at an event in over 6 years. DQ
Wow.
and I popped in for half a day in Philadelphia last year to shoot some tests on these. I was shooting these smoke promos that Go Sports is using. But other than that, it was like Vegas 16 was the last time I had kind of been around. And just the amount of people being incredibly genuinely like, hey man, it is so good to see you. So the thing I'm most thankful for is like a community, a place to belong and where you feel respected and stuff like that. And I think it's interesting because you think about how important that is for kids. And when I say kid, that could be, a 24-year-old to me. I have a 21-year-old. So you put it that kind of, but seriously, I think it sometimes gets overlooked as you start to get on the other end of that. As you start to get into your 40s and maybe beyond, and there is like, well, where do I fit in the world? Okay, well, where, as things have evolved, and when you still see a place, and then you see things like, the Hall of Icons like, giving folks their flowers who have certainly deserved it, and you still feel part of it. So, I mean, that's a long-winded way of saying like what I'm most thankful for is the connections and the feeling of, a community I can be a part of and am respected and welcomed in. I mean, a lot of people don't get that in their life at all,
Yeah,
and I
true.
think it really affects you when you don't have that.
Yeah. I was working a lot with Dylan Fout over the past weekend. He's the keep making things guy, the place for things, and watching him, interact with you and having you sign his wristband. This man
Wild.
loves what you do. He absolutely loves what you do. So it was really special to watch exactly what you're describing, the adoration there. And it kind of made me sit back like, wow, like Dan's had a tremendous impact on someone who's in the same industry. So it's amazing to see that your impact is not just on viewers like me; it's also on creators.
Well, and I think that's something too that I mean, I'm fortunate to have, and for all the people out there creating stuff, I think it's something to make sure you appreciate. Man, you don't know. So I did meet Dylan last year at that, because I kind of lied. We were at the first event last year, but we were shooting Iron Kid stuff. So like we stopped at the field for 5 minutes.
Right.
But we went to see Maddie, and he came up to me and was like, "Hey, like, you're Dan Napoli, right?" I'm like, yeah. And he was like, just rattling. I was like, "I watch One Night in November every time before I go, this and that." And I just, I'm like, "How old are you, dude?" And I'm like, man. So it's just a reminder that like you make these things and you put them out there in the world, and they might connect with people and influence people that you have
Yes.
no idea what it's connected with or inspired them to do. Had a very similar experience with Mafia. And if you get an opportunity that those people actually, you get to meet them and they tell you that, like, that's a super, super gift.
Yes.
And then also, again, for those folks, making stuff, whatever that is, it's I don't know what the view, and again, I know this is probably a very biased perspective, but like, I don't know what the view count is on One Night in November. I don't know. I mean, people saw it, but I know this story, and I'll tell people this story, and that's probably more valuable than just like a number on like a YouTube. Like, remember, those are actual people that, and I say that to like tell somebody like, like, don't be discouraged.
Yeah.
If you don't see a number on whatever it is that you're making that you would like to be. Like, I heard stories throughout the weekend that people were coming up to the Heroines folks, and it's like, I watched this with I mean, dude, I was talking to Callie from Infamous, and we were talking about it, and he's got I think a couple little girls, maybe just what he was saying, like, I watched it with my wife and I watched with my daughter, and it's like having this impact. Like, I don't know what the numbers are on that, but like, that's huge. So it's like, people creating stuff, like, remember that, like, that's the real reason that we're making things, right? We want to
Yep.
connect with people. It's how we express ourselves and we see the world, and like, we need those numbers to do certain things so that we can keep
Sure.
going on. But like, yeah, don't get too discouraged if a number's not what you want it to be, because you might be making a connection with a person that you've never met before, that you're inspiring them to go out and create some things, and that's super, super awesome.
And it just takes one, right, Dan? Like, it doesn't matter. Like you said, don't focus on the view count, because if you can change one person's perspective on the world, you can change the world, because someone's perspective on the world can change their actions and what they do and what they contribute to the world. So keep making things, and you never know who it's going to land on and what that person's going to do from your inspiration. So,
Absolutely.
man, it's been incredible speaking with you, Dan.
Super
Thank you
fun,
so
man.
much for your time. Is there anything that you want to part with for the paintball community?
No, man. I mean, dude, Zyzek, thanks for having me. It's been super fun. I've been seeing all of your stuff come on and I was like, oh, they're talking to like Dirty Dave. They're getting all these people. Like, this is cool. So I've loved seeing this. As far as parting stuff, just if you follow me on social, if you're interested in the Iron Kids doc, we will be posting more regular updates. Ryan Brand gave me a good talking to about you should maybe let people know a little bit more what's going on as you go through the process. So I don't know that it's going to be every week, but I am going to be doing weekly stuff. I probably also by the end of the spring will be marching out like a Patreon because I'm now back out on my own after being like running the films division for a really cool media company for the last 8 years. So I may dig into the archive on that, but follow me on social for updates on the Iron Kids doc, and just anybody that I talked to at the Sunshine Open. It was awesome to see you, and I really appreciate the love from the community.
What are your socials?
It's pretty much Dan Napoli Films on everything.
Cool.
Instagram's really probably the main place that I'm that you can find me regularly. Don't spend very much time on Twitter, and most of the Facebook stuff is just pushed out from Instagram.
Yeah, got it. Cool. Dan Napoli Films.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks for having me, dude. Later.